You know, we're all aware we're in the middle of this huge chronic disease crisis. But what if the main cause isn't what we've been told for decades? Today we're going to dig into the source material from the Ancestral diet revolution, and it's got this really provocative theory. It points to a culprit that might be hiding in plain sight in pretty much everything we eat.
So, let's just get right into it. The big question is this: why are we so sick? I mean, seriously, how did we get to a point where diseases that were practically unheard of are now the #1 killers? We're talking about just over a century here, and things like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, they've just exploded. So the book asks a really simple but powerful question. What on earth changed so dramatically to make this happen?
And when you look at the numbers, the scale of this problem is just staggering. I mean, think about this. Around the year 1900, obesity was at about 1%. Today, it's over 40%. Heart disease, it went from being a medical rarity, something doctors would write papers about, to the #1 killer, period. And macular degeneration, a major cause of blindness, went from less than 50 known cases in the entire world to nearly 200 million. This isn't just some gradual trend, folks. This is a complete, fundamental breakdown of our collective health.
All right, so to solve this mystery, where do you start? Well, you start with the usual suspects, right? The dietary villains we all know and, well, love to blame. Let's see if the case against them really holds up.
I mean, we've all heard it a million times, right? The advice has been drilled into us for decades. Sugar is bad. Saturated fat is bad. Avoid them if you want to be healthy. Cut back on the cake, the soda, the red meat, all to protect our hearts, to keep our waistlines in check. But, as our source material points out, the real story, it might not be that simple.
Okay, so let's actually look at some data. This chart here is super interesting. It shows what's been happening in the UK. You can see that while people have actually been consuming less sugar since about 2004, the obesity rate has just kept climbing and climbing and climbing. Now, if sugar was the main villain, the only villain, you'd expect those two to move together, right? But they don't. This massive gap really suggests that something else, something big, must be going on.
And this isn't just a fluke in one country. The source material spells it out really clearly, and I'm quoting here, "The obesity epidemic continues apace despite reductions in both carbohydrates and sugars in various populations." When you see this same pattern happening over and over, you really have to start questioning whether sugar is the whole story.
Okay, so if sugar is on shaky ground, what about suspect number 2, saturated fat? This is where things get really interesting. The book brings up the Maasai tribe in East Africa. Their traditional diet is just loaded with animal fats. We're talking up to 46% of their calories from saturated fat. Now, based on everything we've been told, these people should be dropping like flies from heart attacks, right? But they're not. Not even close. Heart disease is virtually non-existent for them. How do you explain that?
So, if the cases against sugar and saturated fat are full of holes, where does the investigation go next? Well, it turns to a brand new suspect. And what's fascinating about this one is that it appeared on the scene at the exact same time this whole health crisis kicked off. And that suspect is industrial seed oils. This timeline basically tells the whole story of their hostile takeover of our diet. It's wild. Back in the mid-1800s, stuff like cottonseed oil wasn't food at all. It was an industrial product. People used it for lamp oil. But then, with some clever processing, it got rebranded as food. And then comes the big moment in 1961. The American Heart Association starts telling everyone to swap out their butter and lard for these heart-healthy vegetable oils. And the result? Just look at this. They went from basically 0% of the added fats we ate to a jaw-dropping 86%.
So what does that actually mean for our bodies? Well, it all comes down to a specific type of fat called linoleic acid. It's the main fat you find in these seed oils. The book crunched the numbers, and our consumption of this one thing has shot up by 12 times. Think about that. We went from eating maybe 2 grams a day, which is what our ancestors ate for millennia, to nearly 30 grams a day. That is a massive, radical shock to our system.
Okay, so we've got our suspect, and they were definitely at the scene of the crime right on time. Now let's dig into the actual evidence. Let's see how the book builds its case.
And really, the core of the argument is right here. It's all about the basic makeup of these fats. You look at traditional ancestral fats, things like butter, beef tallow, they have very little of this linoleic acid, maybe 2 or 3%. But then you look at modern seed oils like soybean or corn oil, and it's a completely different story. We're talking anywhere from 20 to over 75%.
That's not just a little more, it's a completely different substance, chemically speaking.
So why is that a big deal? Well, the book argues that this linoleic acid is super fragile, biochemically speaking. It's unstable. And when we flood our bodies with it in these huge amounts that we never evolved to handle, it just breaks down, it oxidizes. You can think of it like metal rusting, but happening inside your cells. This process is called oxidative stress, and it kicks off inflammation and cellular damage, which, as you know, is the root cause of basically every chronic disease we're worried about, from heart disease to diabetes and even cancer. Let's put this theory to the test in the real world. Let's go back to the Maasai and compare them to the modern American diet. It's like a tale of two diets. The Maasai, tons of saturated fat, but almost no linoleic acid, less than 2%. And what's the result? Heart disease is practically unheard of. Now look at the American diet. We actually eat less saturated fat, but our linoleic acid intake is 4 to 6 times higher. And our result? Heart disease is the #1 killer. The correlation is it's impossible to ignore.
And hey, this isn't just a one-off example. The source also brings up the Tokelauans. These are people in the South Pacific who get a full 50% of their calories from saturated fat, mostly from coconuts. But just like the Maasai, their diet is incredibly low in linoleic acid. And guess what? Just like the Maasai, on their traditional diet, heart disease was pretty much a non-issue.
So you've got the history, you've got the population studies, you've got the science. After laying out all this evidence, the book comes to a very clear, and I have to say, very provocative conclusion.
And here it is, the verdict. The book argues that this explosion of chronic disease, it's not really about sugar, and it's not really about saturated fat. The single greatest driver, it says, is the massive, unprecedented consumption of these industrially processed seed oils.
Okay, so what does this mean for you, for me, for all of us? According to the source, the single most powerful change you can make to your diet is to get rid of what it calls the hateful eight. These are the big ones, the most common seed oils that are, well, they're in everything. Pretty much any processed food, from salad dressing to chips to whatever your favorite restaurant is frying their food in, it's probably one of these.
So what do you cook with instead? The recommendation is actually pretty simple. Go back to the fats our great-grandparents used, the fats that have been part of human diets for thousands of years. We're talking stable, nutrient-rich fats like butter, tallow, lard, and also great fruit oils like coconut oil, avocado oil, and a good quality olive oil. The key is they are all naturally low in that unstable linoleic acid. Which leaves us with one last, pretty mind-blowing question to think about. Could the most dangerous thing in the entire grocery store be hiding right there in plain sight? According to this theory, the answer is a big yes. It suggests that the very oils we've been told for decades are heart-healthy might actually be the main thing driving this health crisis. It's a huge, challenging idea for sure, but it definitely makes you want to take a much closer look at the ingredient labels on, well, just about everything.